Dragon Ball Sparking Zero has been out for over a year on PlayStation 5 and Xbox, but it finally made its way over to both of Nintendo's flagship consoles, the Nintendo Switch 1 and Nintendo Switch 2. Is Dragon Ball Sparking Zero any good at all on the original Nintendo Switch? That's what we're going to be looking at in this video. You're going to see some comparisons to the PlayStation 5 edition, versus mode and story mode gameplay, and what it's like in handheld mode. Before we get into it though, do me a solid and hit the like button real quick. You're already seeing some comparison shots in the intro, so let's just get the obvious out of the way first. This game looks very bad in motion, especially when you have it side by side with the superior PlayStation 5 edition. You can definitely see that the game is running at a very low resolution, and so a lot of the finer details, like the outlines on the characters, are almost completely missing. You saw a little bit of this in Guilty Gear Strive for the original Nintendo Switch, but obviously not to this degree. During the quick moving animations, the blurriness gets worse, making the whole thing look like a total mess. But whenever the game slows down, like into a close-up shot of a character's face right before he fires off a big blast, or during character intros and windscreens, the game actually looks almost comparable to the bigger versions. Stages in the game also received makeovers for the original Switch version, where in some cases a lot of areas in the stages were just designed differently altogether. In fact, the stages look closer to the classic Tenkaichi games than they do to Sparking Zero, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I actually kinda like it. This is what I would have liked to have seen done in Mortal Kombat 1 for the Nintendo Switch, but moving on. However, if you're willing to look past the visual cutbacks, you might be surprised at how this game runs on the original Switch. Or maybe you wouldn't be. Stay tuned to find out if it's worth your time or if it's another mess of a game that never should have been ported. The game does run at 30 frames per second for the most part, and while I know this may be a deal breaker for many, when I booted this game up and started playing through the tutorial at the very beginning, I felt the 30 frames, dude. I felt it instantly. It looked and felt so choppy, dude. And I don't know if that's something that happens just in that section, but after having spent a few hours with the game, I can say I just didn't really notice it anymore. But we'll get into gameplay more later. Let's first go through the main menu. I was kind of surprised that the Switch version actually kept all of the animated backgrounds with all the characters like Goten and Trunks running around, but when you see certain things like Bulma moving her arms, that's where you can see some of the jankiness. Granted, I don't have the Xbox Series S version on hand anymore to compare with, so maybe this is a thing across all versions, and again, I am going to be covering the Switch 2 edition as well tomorrow, and then I'll be making a comparison video of both versions, so stay tuned for that. There's also a lot of customization stuff and purchasable items like characters, capsules, and things like that. So now let's get into the performance. Like I said, the game does target 30 frames per second, and while it does maintain it during gameplay sections, making for fairly smooth gameplay overall, performance does tend to suffer in other areas, like when you're cycling through the character select menu, and just cycling through menus in general can feel pretty janky. Almost like Mortal Kombat 1 did on the Nintendo Switch before they fixed it, but of course it's not that bad here in Sparking Zero. Like, it's not even close to being that bad, but MK1 is the closest analog that I can think of. There's a pretty expansive tutorial mode where you learn a bunch of the game mechanics from Piccolo. It's actually a pretty good mode. However, I did notice after finishing some of the tutorials that the game would stutter a lot while autosaving. So far though, from playing this game in versus offline mode, I haven't noticed any slowdowns or stuttering except for when the game is first loading into a match, which by the way surprisingly loads pretty quickly. I honestly don't know what kind of magic that they worked to get this game to run so decently on the original Switch, but the loading is not bad at all. Characters do also suffer battle damage when they're hit with a massive attack, like you can see here, Kefla showing Vegeta a very bad time. I'm going to show you some handheld mode gameplay, but first, I did notice a few bugs, so let's talk about that. When you're in the Xenos orders screen, there's a weird little bug where we can actually briefly see the Japanese text before it switches to English. I've never seen that before in any game, but maybe it's more common than I think, and maybe it was a design choice. I don't know. It's like, I don't remember this being a thing on the Xbox Series version, but then again, I never spent too much time with this game on that system. And another strange bug is where sometimes when characters perform a super attack, the cinematic fails to trigger. So we're left with just looking at a weird looking attack with no sound effects. I've only seen this with adult Gohan, but it may happen with other characters as well. Now let's see what the game looks like in handheld mode. So what I realized while playing this game in handheld mode is that the team behind this port really pulled off a miracle. I think if any game can be called a miracle port for the original Nintendo Switch, it's gonna be this one. The loading into matches doesn't take any longer here than it did in docked mode. Now, obviously the resolution takes an even harder hit in handheld mode, but nobody's gonna go into this game on the OG Switch expecting it to look great. So the fact that it drops so much in resolution is not too big of a hit to it when you consider how well the game performs even in handheld mode. I didn't feel any slowdowns even during the big super attacks. If this game was gonna have problems, it would have been in portable mode, but like I said, the team behind this game pulled off something really good here. I think this is gonna go down alongside games like The Witcher 3 as games that nobody thought could ever be done on an OG Switch, but which ended up being really well done. Does it look rough? Yes. Would I choose this version over the Nintendo Switch 2 version? Of course not. However, if you only have a Nintendo Switch, then in my honest opinion, this would be a fine way to play the game. Well, it would be the only way to play the game, but it would still be a pretty good way to play it because the fun of the game is still here. There doesn't seem to be anything missing and it's not bogged down by major performance issues, which for a fighting game can either make it or break it. And this game is made on the Nintendo Switch. I'm not going to go too much into the online except to say that it's an arena brawler with delay-based netcode. So if you played these sort of games online before, then you already know what to expect. Good connections might play decently, but bad connections will have very, very bad delay and will be virtually unplayable. I have not tried the Nintendo Switch 2 edition yet, but that's the one that I'm going to be playing online with, and I will be reviewing that version tomorrow. I'm going to be doing some online gameplay videos as well. That's going to be it for this video. I'm Switch Played done.